Hi everyone, welcome back to Teacher Dennis Kruger. Today we are building queries. The primary purpose of storing data in a database is to foster easy accessibility or retrieval. Did you ever think about the ways you'd retrieve data from a database? Ultimately, the most easier way of retrieving data is through use of queries. And I know, very fascinating, you wondering what a query is, the purpose of queries, and how to build queries. This video will really help you answer all the questions. We dive in to explain to you the meaning of a query, and we build very many examples of queries that apply to accessing data using very different databases. Now, if you're new to this channel, I would encourage you to hit the subscription button so that you can receive notifications whenever new videos are added to the channel. And if you missed the previous video, just hit up here on the link to review the process of creating a database and creating tables. This specific one will focus on creating queries. So let's get in and start on how to build queries. Like I said, today we are focusing on creating queries, and our focus will be on the following. We'll introduce to queries. We'll look at types of queries in Access. We'll also discuss how to design a basic select query. We'll look at criteria in queries. We'll look at query examples and summarize with sorting and grouping. Now, to begin with, what are queries? Queries are objects that help us to retrieve data from one or more tables based on some set of criteria. You know, the primary purpose of databases is to store data, but ultimately, when data is stored, it must be retrieved or accessed. So we always access data through use of queries. The primary purpose of queries is to help a user filter data. We can also use it to calculate. We can use it to update. We can use it to delete data, and at times generate reports. Now, whenever we'll be creating queries, we'll be using criterion. Criterion will be the search condition or the question that we are posing to our data. Well, next, let's look at types of queries. The first type of query is known as select query. These are used to retrieve data from one or more tables. Their primary goal is to help us now access data which is underlying the tables. The other type is the action queries. These are used to update, append, delete, or at times make queries into tables. We shall use them to modify the structure of our database. Now, we have other queries that are known as parameter queries. These prompt the user to enter some data based on some conditions. We'll use them to allow the user to enter data according to some conditions. Now, we also have cross-tab queries. These are used to summarize data. We literally use them similarly like the pivot tables in Excel, Microsoft Excel. The other type of query, which we may not discuss, is SQL, Structured Query Language. These may be complex, but they help to retrieve data from databases. Now, those are some of the types of queries that exist. Well, I want us to look at now the procedure of designing a basic select query. Now here I'll give you an overview which we shall practically follow. We'll navigate to design view, we'll add fields, we'll set criteria, and then we'll try to run the query. This is just an overview. Keep it in mind because the logical process will follow those steps. Now, in the previous video, please, if you missed, you can hit the link above this video to access the previous video. In the previous video, we looked at how to create tables. I have a student table here, and in this student table, I have student ID, first name, last name, date of birth, gender, class, address, contact, fees. In the previous discussion, we regarded these as field names. And this table is used to store data, information about students. Now, we'll be basing on this table to retrieve data. For example, at some stage, we may want to retrieve students who are male. Maybe students who come from Bali. Or we may wish to know the students who never paid fees. To retrieve data from such a table, we'll use queries. Now, for this video today, we're going to do queries according to data types. From the students table, you note that these field names took different data types. We have auto number, we have text, we have date, lookup wizard, because this is text. Ultimately, this is also short text. And then we have currency. So in this video, we'll look at queries based on 3 data types. We'll look at text, we'll look at number, and then we'll look at currency. Now, to get started, we are going to begin with select queries. Remember, we've said select queries help us to retrieve data from one or more tables and display the results in a dark data sheet. So we'll be utilizing these queries to retrieve data. Let's take a look at this example, and we begin with text data type. I have a question here, and we are required to create a query to display female students, and we are saving it as female. Well, this is my desktop, and I have a folder called School Database. Please, I've shared this database in the description. In case you want to get this database, just below the description, review and click on the link to download the database, and you keep practicing. Share this database in the description. But if you recall, in the previous discussion, in the previous video, I discussed with you how to create a table. So I already have a database called BAPS here, and if I double click on the database, wow, so I'll click enable here just to give me good permission to edit my database. So in the previous database, we created a students table. I have a students table here, and then I have classes table. We call this part a navigation pan. Then we looked at the ribbon, then we looked at ready. Now, according to our question, like you recall, we are required to create a query to return female students. So what we do is, like I guided, we go to create tab. From the create tab, we have so many groups. We have templates group, tables. We've tried to exhaust, looked at table design. Then the next group is queries. The next group is forms. The next group is reports. The next group is macro and code. We'll use the group of queries. And from the group of queries, we have query wizard and query design. So we click on query design. Now, whenever you click on query design, you'll have this dialog box called show table. You are required to select the table with which you want to retrieve the data from. In our case, we are querying students table. So I select students table and I click add, then I close. So if you can note, the query has these following parts. This lower part here is known as the design grid. And above here, we have the students table added. I can normally expand this by resizing. So inside the students table, we have different fields that our table has. Remember, we already created this table previously. Now, what is the purpose of the following parts of the design grid? Well, the design grid has field. Now, field is used to select the field to be included in the query. So we can click this drop down arrow and select the field that we wish to add in our query, or we can simply just drag the field like I'll demonstrate later. Then the next part in the design grid is table. Table will allow us to display the name of the table that the field is in. Automatically, when we add a field here, the table will appear. Well, the other part is sort. Sort is used to specify which fields to base the sort order on. At times, in your query results, you may wish to sort data according to given conditions. So we'll use this part to sort our data by selecting the field, the order, selecting the order. Then show allows us to display or hide a field. You'll observe that when we tick here, a field will appear in the results. And if we remove the tick or uncheck, that field will not appear in the results. And finally, we have criteria. We'll use criteria here to provide the condition, provide the question with which we want to filter the records. So let us continue. The next step here is to add the fields in the design grid. How do you add the fields? You can double click on fields one by one as they add automatically in the design grid. I move to class, I double click to address, I double click contact, I double click fees. So like I said, this field displays the column or the field which you want the query to take. Then table shows the table from which that field is taken. Now sort, currently we will leave it blank. Show, you can see all my fields have a tick. That means I want them to appear. In our query we're trying, we are required to display students who are female. So the next part we're going to do is to provide the criterion. So we identify the field which has got that gender, because female, male are gender attributes. So we identify the field for gender and then click in a cell that corresponds to gender and criteria. I'm going to zoom here so that you can see properly. So I've right clicked and zoom. I'll write here the condition. I've just zoomed the very cell. So in our table, if you recall, we are using the female to, we have used the female to just to show you a little bit here, the table. So in our table here, male is represented by M and female is represented by F. So what we do is inside the criterion we'll put F. You can note that I've added F, and automatically all the text data types will have pair of quotes. You put the string, but automatically Access puts the pair of quotes. Finally, how do we display the results of the query? To display the results after writing the criterion, you click Run. And you can see from my table, I've retrieved only 2 records which qualify or which meet those exact conditions that are F. To save this query, now we click File, click Save. According to the instruction, we are required to save this as female. And then click OK or press Enter. How do we know we have saved our query? We look at the navigation pane. So far, we have female query. To close the query, we move our mouse and click the Close button. Well, the next query we are required to make is to display students, create a query to display students who come from Mbale. Now, if you note our table, if you can see our table here, people who come from Mbale are donated by the word Mbale, Kampala, with the phrase Kampala. So they want us to retrieve Mbale. So to retrieve Mbale, again, we'll go back to the Create tab. We click on Query Design, select the table we are going to query, click Add, Close. You can expand your table using this resizing arrow. Then the next part is to add the fields here in the design grid. So once more, we can double click on the fields to make them appear in the design grid. And after that, the next thing is to provide the criterion. So you identify the field which has Mbale or Kampala. In our case, that is in address. So you move your cursor to the address field, click in a cell that corresponds to address and criteria. Just to allow you to see, I'm going to right click, zoom, and I'll provide Mbale. And again, it is not case sensitive. You can write it in small, you can write it in capital letters. I click OK. Automatically, Access puts quotes because they apply to text data type. Finally, to display the results, I click Run. I move my cursor from the ribbon Query Design here. There is a group called Results here. You can click Run, or you can click View and choose Datasheet View. So I click Run, and automatically I have results here. I have 2 students coming from Mbale. So how do I save my query? Click File tab, then click Save, and then provide the query name. We are required to always use descriptors to provide query names. Descriptors should they will require to save as Eastern. You wanted us to save as Eastern, so you click OK. After saving your query, you can now click Close. So far we have 2 queries. We have Eastern, we have female. In case you want to open your query, just double click on it. And if you want to close it, you move your mouse and click the Close button. So our next query is to return students whose last name begin with M. Students whose last name begin with M. If you can check here, create a query to return students whose last name begin with the letter M. We are saving the query as letter M. Again, to create a query, we go to Create tab. From the group of queries here, click on Query Design. Select the table you want to query, click Add, Close. Then you can expand to see all your fields. We've been double clicking on the field. However, you can add all these fields at once. To add them, you click on one of the fields, hold Ctrl, hold Shift on your keyboard, and click the last field. Once more, click the first field, Ctrl, Shift, click the last field, and then drag them to the design grid. Well, so we are required to return students whose last name begin with the letter M. So we identify the field of last name, click where there is criteria. That is the cell that correspond to last name and criterion. Well, to create this query, we use wildcards. One of the wildcards are symbols that help us to enhance or boost our query. They help us to filter data according to some conditions. Well, so students whose name ends with the letter M, we put star and then put M. Then click OK. So to query those students whose name begin with the letter M, from my cell here, I right click, zoom, because I want you to see properly. So students whose names end with the letter M, we use wildcards. So we put the letter you want to query, and then you put a star. Please note that M and star would allow us to retrieve students whose name begin with that letter. After that, I can now move and click run. And you see, in the last names here, I have Matanda, I have Madibo. Their names begin with the letter M, so I have them in the results. To save this query, we go to File tab, click Save, and I can provide in the query name as begin with M. Then I can click OK. How do I know I've saved my query? I look at the navigation pane. I can close this. Our next query is going to still be in data types. We are told to create a query to return students whose first names end with letter A. To create that query again, we click the Create tab. From the Create tab, we click Query Design, click the Students tab, click Add, and close. Then we'll try to expand this, add the fields. So you can add by double clicking, or I can click one of the fields, hold on my keyboard, press on your keyboard Ctrl and Shift, click the last field and drag all the fields there. Names whose display students whose first name end with the letter A. So I click in the box, I identify the field of first name, I click in the cell that corresponds to criteria. Then I'm zooming it so that you can see names that end with the letter, I put the star and then A. Names that begin with M and star, end, star and A. So I click OK. And finally, to view the results from the results group here on our ribbon from the Query Design tab, we click Run. And we have one student whose first name ends with the letter A. To save this query, we click the File tab, click Save, and now put in the file name as End with A. To save the query, click OK, and now close. Now, well, according to our table or address here, we have two districts or addresses. We have Mbale and then we have Kampala. So we are required here to retrieve all the students except those who come from Mbale. Like we want to have Kampala but not Mbale. Remember, we've tried to query those who come from Mbale, and you can use the same method to query those who come from Kampala. How about those who don't come from Kampala, from Mbale? The query is simple. It's here. Create a query. Create a query to display students who do not come from Mbale. So again, to create our query, we go to the Create tab, click on Query Design, select the Students table, Add, Close, and then Expand. Click the first field, Control Shift on your keyboard, click the last field, drag the fields to the design grid. Then identify the field we are querying. We are querying address because we want address which do not come from Bali. So you move and click in a cell that corresponds to address and criteria. So you can right click in that address, click zoom, and then put not Bali. So those who don't come from Bali, you write not Bali, and then click OK. So you can run. To check the results, click run. Well, you can see from our query, we have all students except those who come from Bali. How are we saving it? According to the instruction, we are saving it as others. So to save our query, we go to File tab, click on Save, and put the name as others. Click OK and close. Now, next we are required to create a query to return students whose address, display students whose address has 5 letters. If you see your table here, we have we have 2 addresses. We have Mbale, Kampala. So they want us to return only the students whose address has 5 letters. That means we are going to count and display students only with address 5 letters. To create our query, we go to the Create tab, click on Query Design, click on Students Table, add the query, and close. Like we've done previously, I'm going to add these fields, highlight all the fields, drag them in the design grid. So identify address. The most important thing here always is to identify the field that you're querying and click in that cell that corresponds to criteria. So in our case here, if I can zoom for you to see properly, we want those students whose address is 5 letters. So I write len, short name for length, open the parentheses. Then inside the square bracket here, I put the field. The field is address. I'll explain a little bit. Close, then is equals to 5. So let's go through that. Len stands for length. It's a function we use to query or count the number of characters. Now, whenever we are using fields in Access, whenever we're using field names in the criterion, we enclose them in square brackets. So this is len, open round brackets, open square brackets. Square brackets here tell us or instruct Access to pick or count characters from a field. And then the number of fields, the number of letters we are counting is equals to 5. Len for length, then the round bracket to enclose our argument, then inside it we have a field called address is equals to 5. So I can click OK, and now I click Run. So in the results I have Mbale. Let's count the letters E1, L3. So there are 5 letters. Kampala has more than 5, so it is not in the results. So we can save this as 5 letters according to the instruction. To save, click File, click Save, and we put 5 letters. Then I click OK. Now, if the videos are helping you and if you're following the sessions, I would encourage you to pause the video and subscribe. This will help you capture all notifications whenever new videos come through. So hit the subscription and click on the bell and choose all. Now, again, we can close our query because we finished working on it. So according to the instructions or sample examples we gave, we've so far calculated on text data type. We've looked at students who are female, students from Bali, names that begin with a letter, names that end with a letter, strings or students who don't come from a place, 5 letters. Finally, for text here, remember in contact as a data type, if you recall, contact here, we agreed contact has to always take text data type. So how do we query contacts that are MTN? The question is retrieve students whose numbers are MTN. Whose numbers are MTN. So MTN uses codes 078 and it uses 077. The first three letters here determine the network. So from these strings here, we can tell that this is MTN, this is MTN, this is MTN. How do we use queries to retrieve students whose contacts are MTN? So from our Create tab, we click on Query Design, click on Students Table, click Add and Close, add my fields like I've done previously in the design grid. Move to contacts, please identify the column that you're querying and click in a cell that corresponds to contact and criteria. I'm zooming so that you can see. I would have written it there. So MTN begins with 077. So earlier on we said the numbers when querying text that begins with, you write that letter you want to query and you put a star. That one. Or we want 078 star. Just to explain a little bit, MTN numbers begin with 077. So all text that, all strings that have text data type that begin with a letter, you write that letter and a star. That's why we've written 077 star, because we're interested in numbers that begin with this or numbers that begin with this. So I can click OK and then I click Run. Wow, so you can see I have three numbers whose strings begin with 078 and 077. So these are MTN contacts. How do I save my query? Because the instruction is clear. Instruction is save the query as MTN. So to save the query, I click the File tab, click Save, and then I type MTN and click OK. How do I know I've saved? I look at the navigation pane and I can now close my query. So that's how we query the text data type. Next we look at number data type. In the number we use the same method as currency. And I have a simple example. Create a query to display students whose fees is 30,000 and above. We're saving it as 30,000. So 30,000 here is currency, but this can also be a number. So to query that, we go back to our Access window, click on Create tab. From the Create tab, click on Query Design, add the table we're querying, close. Then later on, select the fields and add them in the design grid. So I've selected them. Now I can drag them in the design grid. Please note that these ticks here show that the field is going to appear. Where you don't want the fields to appear, you can remove the tick. So if you remove the tick and then you click Run, it is only those fields that have a tick will appear, that will appear. I will go back to design view because we are still in design view. So having added all your fields in the design grid, the next part is to write the criterion. We want students who had paid 30,000 and above, so that means we are querying fees. So from the field of fees, click in the cell that corresponds to criteria. Then you can write your criteria there. I'm zooming so that you can see the criterion. The criterion is simple. For above, we use greater than. But the question is 30,000 and above. That means it is greater or equal to. If it was just above 30,000, we would write greater than sign, and 30. Please do not put commas as thousand separators, as the query won't work. Now remember, our question is 30,000 and above, so we put greater than sign, equals, and 30,000. So I can click OK, then click run. Wow, so in my query I have the results here, 30,000 and above. That means I have 30 and I have 40. According to the instruction, we are saving it as above 30,000. To save our query, we click File tab, click Save, and we can write the criterion as above 30. I can click OK, and that query has been saved. I can now close this. Next, we moving on. They want us to create a query to display students who did not pay. From our table here, you can realize that I have students that didn't pay. For example, I have Matanda. In his fees, it is blank. I have Irene. Also, the fees is blank. How do we create such a query? So we go back to Create tab, click on Query Design, select the table, Add, Close, add the fields in the design grid, either double-clicking one by one or selecting all. Go to the fees, because we are querying students who didn't pay. So from the fees field, click in the cell that corresponds to criteria. Right, let me zoom just because I want you to see. So we want fields that are empty, records that are empty. So we write null to represent empty. Then I can click OK and then run. Wow, so you can see I have a query here and two students, Irene and Pius, as we discovered, didn't pay school fees. So according to the instruction, we are saving this as not paid. They are saved as not paid. So we'll click File, click Save, and save as not paid. And I can click OK to save, then close. So all the queries we've done are represented here. Next, they want us to create a query to return students whose fees or who paid fees between 30,000 and 40,000. We're saving it as between. Again, to create our query, we click the Create tab, click on Query Design, select the table we are querying, add the table, close, add your fields using any of the methods I've showed previously. Again, from the fees, we moved the field we are querying as fees. Click in the cell that corresponds to criteria. Right, click zoom. You can always write from there. I'm zooming so that you can see. Now, the criteria, don't forget, the task is simple. Fees paid between 30K and 40K. So we write the criterion as between 30,000 and 40,000. Precaution, do not put commas as thousand separators. Just write the phrase between 30,000 and 40,000. After that, click OK. If you want to check the results like we've done, either click Run or click View and click Datasheet View. So I have two students. Well, if we can analyze, indeed their fees is between 30 and 40, and we are required to save it as between. So to save our query, I click File, click Save, and I can type between and click OK, then close. Now that has been number and currency data type. Now next we want to conclude with dates and time. How do we query dates and time? Data types. From our table, if you can check very well, we have dates. We have date of birth here as a field, having these entries here. Now, the nature of our question is simple. The question requires us to create a query to display students who were born in February, born in a given month. So how do we create such a query? Again, to create a query, we go to Create tab, Query Design, select the table, Add, Close, add your fields using any of the methods I've demonstrated to you. This time round, we are querying date of birth. The most important question in queries is you always identify the field you're querying. Then move the cursor, click where there is criteria, the cell that corresponds to that field and criteria on the grid. I'm zooming so that you can see. So the criterion is simple. You write the function month, open the round bracket. Now, because we want to query date of birth, so date of birth here is a field name. So we are going to open square brackets, write the field name as date of birth. Date of birth, the way it appears. Please note, when writing these field names, write it exactly. So the field name we are querying is date of birth. We begin with month, open round bracket, open square bracket, write date of birth, close square brackets. This is just to represent a field. Then close round brackets is equals to, Feb numerically is 2, February, so it's month. Then the field name is date of birth, that's why we enclose in square brackets. Then the month we are querying is Feb. So if I click OK and I click run, wow, it's only one person who was born from the month of Feb. To save the query, I click File, click Save, and save it as February. Then click OK. So the query has been saved. I can now close. Well, according to the question, that one is done. Create students who are born in Feb, and we've saved it. Next is create a query to display students who were born in 2010. Well, we are saving it as 2010. To do that, still from our access window here, I click Create, click on Query Design, add the table, close, then add the fields using any of the method. Either you double click one by one or you drag all of them there. Then we go to the field of date of birth because we are querying this date and time data type. So click in the cell that corresponds to date of birth and criterion. For me, I'm right clicking and zoom because I want you to see. So this time around we are querying year, born in 2010. So you write year, open round bracket, write the field name. If I can drag this here, the field we are querying is date of birth, and date of birth is a field. So all fields, if used in criterion, they must be put in square brackets. Please write the field as you wrote it. I've written mine date of birth because I didn't put spaces, so I've written it exactly as it is. Year, round parentheses, square brackets, date of birth, then is equals to 2010. The year equals 2010 in brackets, parentheses. So if I click OK and I click run, wow, so I have one person who was born in 2010. To save this query, I click File, click Save, and now I put 2010. Then I click OK. Then I close. Well, that query has been obtained. The next query is create a query to return students who were born after. students born after these dates. Date is 18th June 2011. So to create this query, we go to Create tab, click on Query Design, select the table you're going to add, click Add, close, add the fields. Using any of the method, for me, I'll drag all of them. Go and click in the field you're querying, date of birth against criteria. Just put the cursor in a cell that corresponds to date of birth and criterion. I'm going to right click here and zoom. So in our case there, we are querying students who are born after. So born after, we used greater than sign because it is greater. Born before, that one. Born after that date, during that date and after, you can put greater and equal to. So they said born after, greater than sign. There's another rule, my friend, you should know, that when querying dates, you must enclose the dates in hash signs. That's how Access gets to know you're writing a date. So write hash, then write 18th of June 2011. Then I can close hash. Please, when writing a date in an expression, always enclose it in hash symbols. Greater than sign means born after that. I click OK, and now I click Run. Oh, nobody was born during that day. So let's double click on students table and see. After exactly, we don't have any person who was born after that day. So we're going to try another date, born after that date of 2010. Okay, to do that, we're going to edit our criterion. So I click the View tab, go to Design View. You can always modify the criterion of your condition, of your query, by opening the query in Design View. After you've written the query, you can go to View, Datasheet View. I've stressed this several times. View, Design View. So I want to adjust this date to 2010. It is greater than sign, date which is 18th June 2010. So if I click OK and I click Run, wow, I have almost all of them. Hey, every other person here was born after, you see, 2010, but July. Nobody's born in June. The date was 18th June 2010. So to save this query, I click File, click Save. Then I can write my query as after June. Then I click OK. And then close. Well, now next is we are required to create a query to display students who are born between 1st and 10th Feb. Between 1st and 10th Feb. To do that, we go to Create tab, click on Query Design, select the table you're querying, click Add, close. Then we add the fields. So I'll click one of the fields, select all the fields. You can double click on one by one as before. Then move to date of birth, click in the cell that corresponds to criterion, right click, zoom. I want you to see properly what you're writing. So they say born, if you can check a little more, born between 1st and 10th Feb. 1st and 10th Feb 2010. So you write between, that should be the criterion, between. Remember, we say dates must be enclosed in hash symbols. So I write hash, write the first date of Feb of 2010, close, that is between 1st, and write the other date which is 10th. But dates must be enclosed in hash symbols. Hash 10th Feb 2010, close hash. So it's simple. It is just between 1st and 10th. However, because it is a date, we've enclosed it in hash, and also we've enclosed it in hash. We can click OK and finally click run. Wow, nobody was born between that date. Let's check our table. If we double click our table and check, between 1st of Feb, yes, we don't have that person. Maybe we can try 2011. Let's try 2011. So I'm going to edit this query. And how do I edit it? While the query is still open, I click view, then I go to design view. While in design view, I will go back to date of birth here. In that very cell for criterion, I right click on it and zoom. So instead of having 2010, I will put 2011. Yep, but the same process between 1st and 10th. I click OK and run. Wow, I have one person, Enoch, was born, yes, in that date range. So I can save as between. The instruction was save it as Feb between. To save our query, we go to File tab, click Save, provide the name as Feb between. Then you click OK. Then to close the query, I click the close button. So that summarizes all the query utilizing date and time. So we've looked at number, we've looked at text, we've looked at number currency, and we've looked at date and time. Alright, next, in continuation with date and time data type, we are required to create a query to display age of all students, and we are saving it as STH. So from our Access database, to create this query, we click the Create tab, click Query Design, add the table, click Add, close, add the fields using the process we're doing by selecting all the fields and drag them to the design grid. Now this time around, we are not going to write a criterion, but we are going to add a new field. So I will scroll to the end of the elements of the design grid, click inside the field. So having clicked inside the field, alright, having clicked in this field, let me try to right click and zoom. Please note that for age, we're adding a new field, and for that reason, we're going to name that field as age. Then we put a full colon. The full colon is just to help us separate the field name from the expression we're going to write. And in this case, I'm using a function called dateDiff. So you write dateDiff, open brackets, open pair of quotes, put YY because we are calculating years, and after that you put a comma. Then we list the fields that we are using to calculate the years or somebody's age. In our case, we are using, in our table, the field having date of birth is date of birth. So we agreed when we're using a field in an expression, we open square brackets and then write date of birth. This is just a field name from our table. In case your field has a birth date, maybe DOB accordingly, write that. So after I've written date of birth, I put a comma, and then the other field which I'm going to use to calculate is the current date and time. Well, the function used to call for the current date and time is date, open bracket, close brackets. Whenever we use this, we denote the computer to use the current date and time. So we're going to get the date difference between date of birth and then the current date. So I can close brackets. So if I click OK, and now I move to the results group here and click run. Wow, I have my age here. So I'm going to save this query as age. To save this query, I click the File tab, click Save, and put in the name as age. Click OK. If I wish to design my query, I go to View tab, go to Design View. Don't forget, we added a new field here. I can always right-click in the cell, zoom for you to see properly. The field was age. I put a full colon, then use the date diff as the function to compute out the date difference between date of birth and the current date and time using the years. Okay, so that's how we compute the age of given entries in our query. So I will close this and save. In continuation, still we are required to create a query to display students who are 13 years and above. 13 years and above. So we are going to go back to the access window here. We click Create tab. Again, go to Table Design, rather Query Design. Create tab, Query Design. Select the table you're querying, click Add, Close, and then add the fields to your design grid. After you've done that, we now move to the last field here. We're going to add again the field for age. So we agreed, write the field name as age, and we're using date difference. In our case, we are computing years. Then we put a comma, specify the fields that you're using to calculate. The fields must be enclosed in square brackets. Date of birth, dates of birth, then comma, I put the current dates, close open brackets, close brackets, like we did above. Age is the field name. Date diff is the function I'm using to compute the age difference between date of birth and the current date and time. And I put 4YY because I'm calculating the years. If I click OK and I click Run, I will have the age. But the question is filter those who are 13 years and above. So I'm going to go back to View, Design View. Below criteria, just as we've done in the previous case, we put the criterion. Above 13 years is written as greater than 13. I've computed my age and I've added the criterion greater than 13. So if I click Run, I have one person who is 14 years who satisfies that question. We are saving this query as 13 and above. So I click the File tab, click Save, and save this as 13 years, 13 and above. 13 and above. Okay. Alright, to continue with our question, we are required again to create a query to calculate annual fees, which is thrice the fees. Thrice fees means the annual fees is fees times 3. So to compute this query, we go back to Create tab, click on Query Design, select the table, click Add, click Close, add your fields. So I select students, select fees, drag them to the design grid like you've done. At the extreme end, we're going to add another column. So I want to right click here and zoom so that you can see. I'm going to put the field name as annual fees. Put a full colon. A full colon separates the field name from the expression. And our expression is simple. We are multiplying 3 times annual fees, and rather fees. Fees is a field, and all fields, if they are to be used in an expression, they must be enclosed in square brackets. So we put 3 times then fees, close square brackets. then click OK. If I click run, I will have a new field for fees. Here initially, for example, the student here has 20, 3 times is 60. The next student, Abdul, here has 30, 3 times is 90. How do we save the query? File tab, save, and give it the name as annual fees. Then I click OK to save the query. How do I know I've saved my query? It will always appear in the navigation pane. Next, our other query in calculated is to create a query to calculate UNSA fee, which is 5% of fees. Well, 5% means 5 over 100 times fees. Again, from the Create tab, we click on Query Design. Select the table, Add, Close, add the fields to your design grid by dragging them there. Scroll to the extreme end, add the field name. I'm going to right click in this field and zoom. So our new field is called UNSA fee. I put a full colon and then I write 5%, so it's 5 out of 100, that's 5%, times the fees, and fees is a field, so a field has to be enclosed in square brackets, and you can always write them either in small letters, capital letters, as long as you follow the correct spelling. So it's UNSA fee, field name, full colon, separate the field name, then the expression. So if I click OK and I click run, wow, I have now UNSA fee, which is computed 5% from the fees. To save my query now, I click File, Save, and I put in the file name as UNSA. Then I click OK, then close. Now, these have been queries on date and time data type. Our next focus of this video is to look at queries based on multiple conditions. Please note that we've been designing queries that only utilize one condition. That means we've been querying one field. I want us to take a look at this example. We are required to create a query to display male P7 students. Please note that in this case, the students that have to be retrieved have to be male, that is one field, and then have to be in P7. If I can show you the table subsequently we've been working with so that you can have the picture of what we're talking about here. In the category of male, we have Enoch, P7, Pius, male, P6, Abdu, male, P7. Now, we want to only retrieve, using the select query, the male and P7. That means the two conditions have to be met for somebody to appear in the query. Alright, so from the Create tab here, we click Query Design, add our table, close, and then select the fields by dragging them to the design grid. Now, according to our query, we have two conditions: return male and primary 7 candidates. So under gender here, we click in a cell that corresponds to gender and criterion and put in M for male. Also for class here, we are going to put in the criteria as primary 7 because we are interested in primary 7 candidates. We'll put them on one line because one line in the sense that all follow under criterion, because the records that should be retrieved should both be male and the class has to be primary 7. Let's try to check our query. To check our query, we got the results group from the Query Design tab and run. In our case here, we've got a query. Now take note of these two records. I have Enoch Kruger is male and primary 7. And I also have Abdu is male and primary 7. If I go back to design view, in case the question was create a query to return male students or primary 7 candidates, then instead of writing it on the same line here, you would put it on this line under all. The same field of class, but this time around in the part or attribute of all. I'll run my query because that's how the question required us to do. And according to the instruction, we are saving it as P7 males. So to save our query, go to File tab, click Save, and put in the file as P7 males. Now I can click OK to save the query. P7 males, Ctrl S, P7 males. Please note that a file name cannot have a symbol. P7 males. Then I close. Next, we are required to create a query to display students who come from Mbale or a male. However, in this query, we are going to sort students in ascending order, that is according to their last names. We are saving the query as male or Mbale. The students should either come from Mbale or a male, and their results should be sorted in ascending order according to last name. So let's create this query. To create, we click the Create tab, go to Query Design, select the table, add the query, click Close. Again, we are going to add the fields in our design grid. And accordingly, we go to the part of address. Maybe we can begin with gender. In our case, gender here, like we've done, we are putting M for male. Then under address, please, instead of writing it on the same line, since the question was retrieve students who either come from Mbale or a male. So the other criterion, either way, should be written in this part of all. So I'll right click in address, zoom, and then I write Mbale accordingly. Then click OK. M or Mbale. So if I click run, please note we have several records here. For example, I have Enoch is male and comes from Kampala. What makes him appear in the result here is because he is male. I have another very weird student. I have Irene, she's female, but comes from Mbale. Why is she in the results? Is because she comes from Mbale. So in this case, we are displaying records which are either coming from Mbale or a male. In any case, the two results either has to be fulfilled, not both the conditions. So we, as required, have gone back to design view. You can always go to view, design view. They wanted us to sort the results in ascending order according to last name. So while in design view here, under sort, we go to last name, click on this field. Having clicked in the cell, the drop down menu will appear. So click the drop down arrow and select the order. So I've selected ascending order. Now if I click run, I will have the results. The last names are alphabetically in ascending order. Like you can see, K comes earlier than M and N accordingly. So we are saving this. The instruction was clear. Save it as Mbale or male. So we click the file tab, click save, and put Mbale or male, and click OK. Close. Well, that has been our tutorial today. If you found this tutorial helpful to you on how to create queries If it was very of good use to you, please hit the subscription button. You can also give the video like by hitting the thumbs up, so that probably other members who have similar challenges can also get through. Now, in the next videos, I'm going to share with you creating queries part 2. We look at how to update, how to append, how to create parameter queries, and how to use the cross-tab queries. So this has been part 1. Let me catch you again in part 2 as we explore more on queries. Teacher Dennis Kruger here again. Bye bye.